Okay, I see a few people are still joining us, so welcome. But I think the masses have made it here for the people who will join us. Very good turnout. I'm guessing there's a lot of demand to know about the NIS2 directive. Um, so let's get started. So this webinar will be about 1 hour. 45 minutes in the initial presentation, then we'll have 15 minutes afterwards. My name is Jonathan Frimmer. I work at Waterfall Security Solutions, who's hosting the webinar. We're an OT security company that provide protection for OT. Today, we're going to talk about the NIS2 directive. We're going to have Dr. Jesus Molina. Again, should be about 45 minutes for the whole presentation. If you have a question while the presentation is ongoing, go into the chat and send us that question. And then at the end, we'll address those questions as they come in and hopefully have enough time to answer everyone's question. So everyone, thank you for joining, and please welcome Dr. Jesus Molina, the Director of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions. Dr. Molina is deeply involved in the realm of cybersecurity, contributing to several prestigious organizations that focus on evaluating cybersecurity standards, such as the International Association of Public Transport, the UITP for Rail Security. Previously, Jesus has served as the chairman of cybersecurity at both the Trusted Computing Group and the Industrial IoT Consortium. Currently, he imparts his extensive knowledge as a professor of rail cybersecurity at the Universidad Politécnica de Catalunya. His expertise and leadership in these areas make him a highly respected figure in the field of industrial cybersecurity, and has been a speaker at RSA, Black Hat, and DEF CON. Today, Dr. Jesus Molina will be guiding us through the NIS2 directive, particularly from the unique perspective of operational technology professionals. His talk will discuss on how the directive impacts the OT landscape, focusing on the aspects that professionals in this field need to be aware of. So without further ado, here is Dr. Jesus Molina to tell us about the NIS2 directive. Jesus, take it away.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Jonathan, for the kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen and get right to this. All right. So here's the presentation. Hopefully you guys are seeing it. The presentation today is going to be NIS2 for OT professionals. And I'm going to divide this talk into two. The first part will be the basics of NIS2. I think this is important because if I start talking about what is important for us, OT professionals, operational technologies professionals, it's going to be a little bit missing. So I will devote the first 20 minutes of this talk to discuss the basics, and then I will go into the details, a little bit of a deep dive on what is important for us, OT professionals, in this directive, okay? So, all right, so what is NIS2? First, NIS2 is a directive that affects 27 European Union member states, so all of them. I want to demystify a little bit what NIS2 is. And it's a document that you can download yourself, and it's in every language of the European Union has, Greek, Croatian, like any language that member states has, Spanish, you can download it. It has 70-something pages. It has a preamble, which discusses the basics of what is the directive about. And then it has 46 articles that need to be transposed into law by the member states. And we will discuss a little bit what that means of transposition of the directive. Now, of these articles, most of them are going to be used by the government to make the strategy, to create government bodies like a UA Cyclone. We'll discuss this also. But, you know, the important articles that are there, I will discuss what are the articles that for us, OT professionals, are, you know, important to understand. One thing that stands out of this directive is the fact that there are a lot of fines. You know, there's like a lot of money and accountability into it. In the previous directive, NIS2, there was not a set amount of money. Now there is one, is 10 million euros, which is quite a bit, or 2% of the worldwide turnover. So important thing is accountability, and this is one of the things that will people move, like into adding more cybersecurity into their systems. Another important thing we have to know is when this directive is going to be transposed into law, which is October 17th, 2024. So mark this into your calendars as an important date. Now, before we go into details, and I'm going to discuss the basics of NIS2, a little bit of vocabulary, so I don't have to tell everybody every time these items come up, is CSIRT, which is the Computer Security Incident Response Team. This is the body that every European Union country needs to have in order for you to report or to discuss any incident that occurs into your operational system. So important to understand which one is your CSIRT. You probably already know which one is this if you fall into NIS-D, because if you fall into NIS-D, the CSIRT has already been created. So you can go into the EU webpage and check what is your CSIRT or information for your country. Another thing that's important to understand is what is essential and important entities. In NIS-D, we have only essential entities. We added important entities. The differentiation on these two entities happens in two articles in the NIS2 Directive. At this point, I'm not going to go into a lot of discussion on what's the difference between essential and important. The thing is that you can be separated into these two. And another wording that is really cool, and I really love this acronym, which is EU Cyclone. It comes to the EU Cyber Crisis Liaison Organization. It makes me think how long these politicians took to get this name right. But it's just the same as the CSIRT, but for all the European Union. So this is the body that is being created as part of NIS2, and it's a new thing. And it's going to take care of collecting all the information and respond to any attack the European Union has as a one. Now, for the timeline, a lot of people ask me, when is this going to happen? When is this going to occur? So the important things you need to understand here is that January 16th, after 2 years of deliberations and putting our tax at work, our good politicians from the European Union drafted this NIS2, and it come into effect January 16th, 2023. Now, understand that this is NIS2 replaces NIS-D, which was created in 2016, or came into effect in 2016. The first thing that we will see as part of this NIS2 is the first report by this organization called EU Cyclone that has already been created by the European Union. Important date, we discussed it before, October 17, 2024. This is one every European Union country needs to publish the law or the transposition or how they are going to make this directive come into effect. In January 17, 2025, we'll have the first report of these individual CSIRTs on how they have been cooperating with each other, how they have been getting all these new reports. Another extremely important date is April 17th, 2025. A lot of people ask me, hey, Jesus, do I fall into NIS2 or I do not fall into NIS2 as a company? Well, you will know in April 17, 2025. Hopefully, after this talk, you will know if you are going to fall in under NIS2. But this is the time when every member state needs to make a list, like the naughty and good list that Santa Claus does, same thing, but with saying these are the important entities of this country, and these are the essential entities in this country. Finally, in October 17, 2027, so little bits, we will have a revision of the directive, the same thing that happened with NIS2. So we may have NIS3, or maybe we won't. Now, one fair question you can ask is like, Jesus, what can you give me that ChatGPT doesn't, right? I have heard that too. And NIS2 can be, you can browse it. I actually created my own ChatGPT for NIS2. I uploaded all the documents that I think was relevant, including the directive. And it provides you a fair answer. However, please do take that with a grain of salt. ChatGPT is really bad at logic, math, and like putting things together, and it lies a lot. As you can see, I put that like 2 hours ago, and as you see, 350 plus 300 plus 350 doesn't add to 1,000. So be careful with what it says, and trust me more than ChatGPT. And I will also provide you with a scope that it won't happen with a chatbot. Now, why this webinar? First, because I think just taking into account all what they have heard as a professor, from my clients, I think people are afraid of NIS2. And I think OT professionals need to be understanding that we need to understand NIS2 in order to weaponize it in our favor. If you're an OT manager, to get money from your board, if you're a board or you are a CISO, to understand that OT is also important, even if in NIS2 there is no specific wording for OT, but most companies that fall into NIS2 are OT companies. So although NIS2 wording is created by politicians, and the wording, it doesn't provide any kind of clues that it's focused in OT, it actually is focused in OT somehow. Obviously, there is DNS information and all that stuff, but please don't be fooled. This is a directive we need to understand as OT professionals in order to improve our cybersecurity. I'll explain a little bit how we can do that. But before we go into that, one other question that I keep being asked is that, well, Jesus, this is a directive, not a law. How do you know what the law of my country is going to be? And is this a standard? So let's clarify this. The NIS2 is a directive. A directive means that it's a legislative act that enforces that every EU country needs to be able to enforce whatever this directive says, however they want, but they need to enforce it. And usually this is with a law. How this law is going to be transposed, it really depends on what the directive says. If the directive is very vague, then the law can be totally different from one country to another. If the directive is very specific, for example, it says $10 million in fines, it may be $17 million in fines, but it will not be $8 million in fines. So you have to understand that directives can, have like the laws transposing directive can have wiggle room, and that was the problem with NIS-D, as I will explain in a second. But what you have seems to be quite, I will tell you what are the wiggle room parts and what the parts will be very specific. A national law is whatever law the lawyers in this country need to be able to, check in order to enforce fines or whatever is necessary. And that's what we will have, and I will send you, my company will send you a link. I am going to monitor how each country is going to enforce the directive. So we'll have a webpage where we track a little bit how every country does it, and more importantly, how does it for OT professionals. Regulation is a different object, which is an actually legally binding document created by the European Union or by your country, which affects every country. And examples of that are GDPR and the Network Codes of Cybersecurity, more recent than GDPR. As you may understand, with GDPR and all the cookie, yes to cookies, it is a kind of like a complicated thing to do a regulation for every country. And they try to avoid it. That's why NIS2 is not a regulation, it's just a directive. Finally, a standard is something that all we get together, all the European Union countries or countries around the world, and decide that these are the guidelines. These are not legally binding, but there are guidelines that we agree upon that we should use for certain things. Cybersecurity, IEC 62443 is usually the most recognized ones, but there are others, and we'll talk about the NCCS as a regulation and how this applies to NIS2, and also something else like TS 50701, which is a standard which is unique for rail. With that said, what is NIS2? Well, finally, we get to the core here, which is an enhanced directive, which is succeeding NIS-D. And it tries to streamline the reporting, the cybersecurity, and the penalties for not following certain cybersecurity rules for companies that are deemed to be critical. Again, it may change how your country will transpose this, yes, but there is a very limited flexibility in certain aspects, which is the ones I will discuss. It targets mainly OT sectors such as energy, transport, etc. Now also manufacturing. We'll discuss that in a second. But it also targets other things such as DNS servers, cloud infrastructure. However, we'll focus on the OT sectors, which are, as you will see in a second, the ones that make the most out of the NIS2 directive. Now, again, the second question is, well, how is this going to work on transposition? There is already a directive, it's called NIS-D, and you can track in the europa.eu how it has been transposed into law by each country. I also can check the CSERTs and the bodies that are representative for the different sectors for each country. This is the Netherlands. But you can go to Europa EU and check for your country what happened with NIS-D, which is the previous directive, and how it was transposed into law in my country. So you can do that by yourself and check what happened with NIS-D. But why we are doing NIS2? Why NIS-D was not enough? Well, the problem is not the way it was transposed into law by each European Union country was very different. So NIS2 tries to basically harmonize how this directive is going to be transposed this time into law by each country. One thing that is critical is the expanded and clarify the scope of what entities fall into NIS2. One problem was that there were countries that had like a lot of companies under NIS2, while other countries have only 3. So that was problematic. So now there is a size cap rule, which I will explain, and new sectors added to the mix. Another problem was the accountability. Some countries, like the United Kingdom, that sadly, as we know, is not part of the EU, but it was when NIS-D took place, had $17 million in fines, while other countries, which I'll not point a finger to, just because it's not right, had only $20,000 in fines for non-compliance with NIS2. Obviously, from 17 million to 20,000, the way every country, thought about NIS-D was quite different. One thought it was kind of a joke, others thought that it was extremely important. They could do $17 million. So this is trying to be improved in NIS2. Another one and problematic, and that comes from a report from ENISA, which is one of the cybersecurity bodies of the EU, was that we don't spend enough in cybersecurity. And NIS2 wants you, as an OT professional, to really think about cybersecurity and start spending. I mean, the US, which is what we look at, spends way more in cybersecurity and way more in OT cybersecurity that we do. So it is important for us to take this directive and use it to convince our board that we need to spend more in OT cybersecurity. Now, from NIS-D to NIS2, what happened? What changed? In NIS-D, we have all these essential entities. There were only essential entities, but there was no reasoning on why one of these entities, energy, will be part of NIS2. It was for you to see, is that company critical or not? Now this has changed. If your company has more than 49 employees and make more than what it says there, $10 million or in revenue, or has 30 millions in assets, then if it's one of these in one of these sectors, energy, transportation, then it falls into NIS2. This is called the size cap rule. So this is very important. Now it's mathematics. It's above this, it's part of this list, then you are. They divided into 2. They added more essential entities, drinking and wastewater, manufacturers of pharmaceuticals, that's really important. Now, if you're a manufacturer of pharmaceuticals and you are above the size cap rule, then you are part of NIS2, and space. Important entities, as I discussed, is a new thing. The difference, which I will not go into details, is that you have less fines, 7 millions instead of 10 millions, and a little bit less oversight. Maybe the bodies in country that will evaluate if you are complying with NIS2 will be different. But these important entities also fall under NIS2, which are food production, manufacturing of chemicals, medical devices, you can see there, heating, and waste management. Apart from that, even if you believe that you don't apply to do this, if your country believes you are part of NIS2, it says, well, you are critical. I mean, if you have like only 3 employees, you're important for national security. You maybe also fall into NIS2. And finally, a little bit of the wishy-washy part of this is that if you're a subcontractor, infrastructure provider, and service provider, depends on how you're embedded into this company that falls into NIS2, you may fall also into NIS2. That part is a little bit the wiggle room that maybe any EU country will decide, if, how this is applied. All right, so this is what NIS2. Now, what are the entities? And now we're going to be a little bit on to this is the basics, what happened in NIS2, what's changed, are you part of it? Here, the main question I hear always asked to me is that, Jesus, does my company fall into NIS2? I am manufacturer companies of this. And again, if you fell into NIS2 under NIS2, you also are falling into NIS2. I mean, this is obvious, right? If you weren't, then, if you were a wastewater management, drinking management company, now you fall into NIS2 if you have more than like 50 employees. Manufacturers, that's the part where it's a little bit more complex to decide. It depends on what you manufacture. And this is the first thing I'm going to discuss as part of this specific OT guidance, which is manufacturing now is part of NIS2. And manufacturing has quite a bit of issues compared to other companies that, as they fell under NIS2, usually they took already a lot of actions in order to apply standards. Manufacturing has lived in a little bit of a different world. And the problematic of this is that we made a report on attacks with physical consequences. I'll send you the link also after this webinar if you want to download it. And disproportionately, several attacks that not only steal data, but actually have physical consequences, such as machines stopping or damage to the machines or things like that, were manufacturing. So also manufacturing is the second largest ransomware attack target. And these two objectives probably are to make sure that manufacturing companies that are critical for that country actually have a more serious and rigorous evaluation of their cybersecurity. I have seen manufacturing companies saying, well, I don't want to upgrade my firewall because I don't care if there is a ransomware, I have insurance, blah, blah, blah. Now, you don't care if you have insurance, you will pay to the government a fine if you don't apply rigorous segmentation, for example, of your manufacturing company. So my recommendations for manufacturing sector is to really look at your systems, apply standards as 62443, and really you need to start doing a risk assessment if you haven't started now. All right, so the second part I want you to understand is there is like 46 articles. And most of these articles, I have a guide where I have, going through every article, and I know what every article says, so, or discusses. And truthfully, most of the articles are meant for the government, make a cybersecurity strategy for your country, create a CSIRT, make sure the CSIRT discusses things with each other, and each article discusses one of these subjects. But there are 2 articles, actually there are 4 articles that I will single out for us OT professionals to understand and really understand and be able to tell your board Article 21 says this. And that is why you need to put money into my OT security, or that's why we need to start a strict risk assessment, or that's why we need to start to use 62443. So 2 articles that are really important are the ones that will cause you fines. So fines will not happen if you don't, the only 2 articles that's, it says if you don't comply with these 2 articles, you will be subject to fines. If you care only about that, is Article 21 and Article 23. Article 21 says that you need to have an appropriate level of security. And then it goes into all the different elements that need to have this appropriate level of security, and you need to do a risk assessment, and you need to check about your supply chain, etc. I will review with you the verbatim discussion of the Article 21 in the next slide, okay? Because I think it's important, and I think you should download and read it for yourself, because that's the article which is critical or essential in this directive. Another article which is really important is Article 23. Article 23 mandates that there has to be a fast and accurate reporting of cyber attacks, and you need to report this in 24 hours. Then I will discuss this in another slide. The reporting schema, it's report first 24 hours, then another report in a week, I think. The important thing for OT professionals is in the past, sometimes when we have an incident, they hide it or put it under covers or whatever. If you do that now and you are found that you did that, you will be fined. So Article 23 is extremely important. And the important about fines here is it's not only about fines. Also, there is wording in the directive that it may have personal liabilities. So if you're a person hides an incident, that this incident is known, you have not reported it, and you make the decision, you may be personally liable. So this transparency is going to help a lot, but also is something you need to understand. Another article is Article 25, it's the encouragement of using European Union standards and regulations. And I think this is really, really essential. You cannot say, I have done enough cybersecurity. You need to look at European Union standards. What the standards apply to your vertical? What the standards you need to use, and you need to use these standards. If you don't, and there's an incident, then you may have a problem. I will give you examples on how likely OT standards you may use. I will talk about the Network Codes of Cybersecurity, which is a regulation, and how this may involve into how you apply NIS2. And I will talk about the successor of TS 50701 for rail. This is the standard I'm teaching in my course here in Spain. And I will not go into a lot of details of it because it's a lot, but I think it's an incredibly well-crafted standard, and everybody that's either you're in energy, I think you should take a look at it because I think it's very interesting. Now, next slide, I'm going to go into Article 21. And I'm going to go to Article 21, and this is verbatim. I copy-paste this directly from the directive. Is talking to you about what kind of cybersecurity you should put into your system. And what you should use as an OT professional, if you are in a critical infrastructure, is the fact that it has to be proportional. Everything you do needs to be proportional to the risk entailed for this segment to be hacked. So with that in mind, the first thing you should think about is divide your network or your different operational networks into segments depending on the risk and consequences of this segment to be hacked, and put proportional measures for each segment. What that means is that the measures you should put for IT should be much different than the measures you should put for OT, which is critical for even the lights, or like putting energy to people, or creating food, or doing anything that is critical, and in particular, safety critical. So if you have decided to put a crappy firewall into a safety critical system, a signaling system in transportation, for example, and somebody dies because of you did that, you cannot say anymore that, hey, I put a firewall and that was it. That was not proportionate to the level of circumstances that could happen if that segment was hacked. And you will be maybe personally liable for it. So this is what changes. And I'm not saying to scare you. It's more for you to say to your management, look, like this is very clear now in the directive. And it's going to be how transposed into law. It's going to be in your country. But yes, it has to be proportionate. Has to take into account the state of the art. So, and international standards. So again, if there's a standard there for rail, like TS 50701, you should use that standard. If you're not using that standard and you're using something else, you may be also like fine if the incident has consequences. So risk posed and consequences are really important in this directive. We have this threat report I talked about, and the consequences in the past, before 2020, of having a cyber attack into your OT infrastructure will usually IT. We only have like 5 or 6 incidents like Triton or Stuxnet in the past where actually they have consequences that were physical. That changed. Now we have hundreds of incidents with on the records. I mean, there may be more, and I'm sure that with this directive coming into effect, as people will have to report, there will be even more. But we have been tracking at Waterfall the attacks on OT that happen to have physical consequences. So trains stopped, machines not working, and this is increasing quite fast. 2020 we had 20, 2022 we have 60, and we project this year, last year, 2023, we'll have around 100 or 120 or something like that. So these are changing. So consequences are changing. Then to fulfill this directive, you need to understand this. You need to understand that you cannot put the same cybersecurity for IT as OT according to the directive, because the consequences and the risk to people is different. So let's understand that clearly. And I have seen people in the UK, which sadly, again, are not part of the European Union, where have $17 million in fines, being very understanding of this fact, because they had $70 million in fines, and when you go to an energy company in the UK, they have already implemented 62443 and other standards. Not only that, they go above and beyond 62443, because they not only want to follow the standard, they want to ensure that there is no possibility that there is an incident that they make them liable, because they didn't put whatever they thought it was critical to protect. Now, we're going to discuss Article 23, which is reporting. You have to report the incident to your local CSIRT, and you can find that in the webpage of europa.eu in 24 hours. This is an early warning, something is happening, right? Then you have to do an incident notification, which is a longer version. And I assume that every CSIRT will send you, hey, this is the report you have to fill out, this is what's happening with NIS in 72 hours. And there has to be a complete report of the incident, what happened, what was the causes, blah, 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 in a month. The CSIRTs will collect all this information and engage with the European-wide bodies, which will be ENISA and EU Cyclone. These are mentioned by name in the directive. So and there is a problem that the whole European Union needs to take care of, then EU Cyclone will be the agency that will do whatever is required to address the attack. Supply chain. I asked a lot, is supply chain in directive? And yes, in the preamble, you see supply chain, supply chain, supply chain. In Article 21, you see by name supply chain needs to be evaluated. And there is Article 26, which is the one that is a little bit more concrete. My feeling is that supply chain is one of these items that, as it doesn't is kind of vague on how to be done in order to evaluate supply chain, that every country can have a lot of wiggle room. So you can say you can only use things from or supplies from the EU. You can do many things as in the law for supply chain. What it says there is that it's suggested to have certification for compliance coming from the European Union. That likely may say, a lot of countries will go for 62434-2, which it's an evaluation of that compliance with European Union standards. And then there is all this encouraging, and that is the wiggle room. It's encouraged to have trusted services. What that means, it depends on. It's supposed to have, maybe the country will have some trusted services that they suggest you use. And then the commission, which is the directorate, which I have been in contact, discuss this. They may in the future provide a list of bad entities or entities we should not talk with, etc. So that is up to that. So this sort of wiggle room on how supply chain is going to be evaluated, and it's a big problem, obviously. I have discussed with other things. That is mean that we're going to use SBOM, like the so-called bill of materials and blah blah blah. Again, these are the wiggle rooms. There may be countries that say you need to use SBOM. However, it's really vague right now how supply chain needs to be evaluated. Now, I'm going to talk about two to end, and then we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A. I'm going to go a little bit into what, and this is me, not the directive, what I believe you should do in order for you to be, have peace of mind, right? Or have an understanding that you are compliant. I think that most of you, if you fall under NIS-D, you have done and you are in energy, for example, you probably have applied 62443 or other regulations. If you're in manufacturing and you're hearing this, you may be a little bit, in the process of doing all that. 62443, which is the European-wide regulation and has four. I am not going to go to discuss this because I believe that probably most of you know 62443. I know it hard, so I know every parameter of this. So I will talk about two other things that you may not know. Just out of the bat, 62443 should be the one thing that you look at, but you have to be, in my opinion, above that in a lot of cases. One thing that has come up from the European Union is a regulation. It's not a directive. It's not a standard. It's a regulation. So it needs to be enforced by the different countries. And this is the Network Codes of Cybersecurity. Why these things, these codes came about is because the sending energy or the exchanging of energy is something that needs to be regulated, because if one country has a bad transmission policies for cybersecurity, it may affect other countries because they receive energy from this. So the implications that they want to avoid is to power loss, capacity reduction. So they provide very, very specifics on the minimum requirements, the certifications, the reporting, and crisis management. One thing that stands out to me is that when you do the risk assessment, you at least have to determine if your networks are of high impact. Suppose it's like you are an energy company, so probably your OT system has high impact, or critical impact. And you have to provide different cybersecurity for these segments. So basically, you have to tell this is critical, meaning safety important, like a substation, and say this is a critical impact segment. I am going to apply the more cybersecurity or the most state-of-the-art cybersecurity. For example, we at Waterfall provides universal gateways. I will think that if you want to send information about your capacity using standards like IC 104, and your system is basically unidirectional, I have seen a lot of people that because of this new regulation, they have decided to start using, two bilateral unidirectional gateways, to send information between companies or one unidirectional gateway. And that is because this is appropriate and it has been determined as critical impact, so advanced controls need to be imposed. So, for example, in that segment, I believe that even if you are not in transmission, in energy, and this regulation doesn't apply to you, you need to take a look at this and understand that probably that's what you should start doing at the very least. Divide your system into systems that has IT or segments that are IT-ish or like not that critical or that productivity critical, and segments that are critical for the business. Critical meaning that it can be, machines can be stopped, people can die or something can happen there, and at least make that partition very clear. So you can apply different controls to all these different segments. Manufacturing, I'm talking to you, I have seen IT segments all merged with OT. Now is the time to make a division and put controls there that make this segmentation very, very clear. TS 50701, which is going to hopefully appear into law in 2025 as IEC 63452, is a one like technical specification that will turn into a standard. Again, I'm giving a class. I have said that like many times, but I like to say it because I am very happy with this standard. As you can see in the right, NIS2 directive applies to the whole thing. So if you have an IT segment, it says in that standard that you should use ISO 27001, but in the control zone or OT, you have to use TS 50701, or when it happens, IEC 63452. It's a very good standard, in my opinion, because it takes the good things about 62443, it puts into the context of rail, and it applies to it. And it does, these clause 6 and clause 7 that describe how to do a risk analysis for rail. It discusses how to talk with legacy systems that may be critical. It suggests unidirectional gateways for doing that, but that's beside the point. The point is that this is what I believe is going to happen with most of the verticals. Is they are going to create the standards, maybe drawing from 62443, that are easy to apply across all European Union, that are more harmonized. And for example, specific example, if you want to comply with NIS2 and you are in rail and you have more than 50 employees, then you should start looking at 63452 and apply to it and do the risk analysis as closest discusses, and really be comfortable telling your management that you need to apply this. We need to apply this standard, because if not, and we have an incident in our transportation, in our metro system, and we have not done this, we may liable and get a fine for this. So this is a specific example of something that is really a specific of rail, but I think should apply to other verticals. It's using European Union standards in order to comply with the regulation. Again, to finish up, I am going to give my kudos to the team that did TS 50701, because for me, it's one evaluation of cybersecurity that it was very necessary for public transport or transport in general, and they did an incredible job applying that, and I think give a very good look at how to apply NIS2 or how to be compliant with NIS2 for a specific vertical. All right, so finally, and to end up, as you know, in the other side of the pond, in the US, there is not a directive or a regulation. They really don't like regulation that much. They have some, the regulation for energy. But if you look at the Biden-Harris cybersecurity agenda, it aligns quite well with NIS2. It also proposes reporting. It also proposes the creation of pan-American or like US-wide agencies to collect. It also proposes to have states recollect information. But the difference here is that in the case of the US, they do have the power to enact legislation really fast, which the European Union doesn't have. It took like 3 years or something, when the Colonial Pipeline happened, there was a mandate to isolate OT systems from IT systems. So this thing that happened in the Colonial Pipeline doesn't happen again. So it's a little bit different how it works. Now, I think we should also look at that, and understand that this segregation between OT, IT, and divided and segment, it's very compatible with what we have seen in NIS2. All right, so I'll give like another 10 minutes for question and answers. But what I want to have the takeaways is that NIS2 is an evolution of NIS-D. It expands NIS-D. It makes much more clear who is under NIS2, and it enhances the accountability and increases the transparency for companies. It focuses on risk-based measures in Article 21, and Article 23 focus on reporting. These are the two articles that if you don't comply with them, you will get fines, right? So what I believe is going to happen is to lead stricter standards that EU-wide, and reading beyond the lines. And again, I don't want to say that in NIS2 it says that you OT needs to do this or that. What I am saying is you as an OT professional need to weaponize or use in your favor to increase the cybersecurity of your segment more if you know it's lacking, by saying that NIS2 says very clearly in Article 21 that the cybersecurity you impose in your system need to be proportional to the risk. And the risk of an operational segment is different than the risk of an IT segment. And the risk of a safety critical segment in transportation, say signaling system in transportation, or the turbine system in an energy sector, it's very different from the IT segment. And it will be very difficult for you to defend yourself if you have a standard such as TS50701 or whatever is going to happen after TS50701 in rail, and you decide not to do what the standard said, and because of that you have an incident. So, and you may be personally liable. So I think you believe for managers, you need to understand this, understand what is may happen, but as OT experts, we need to understand and say Article 21 says that, you can tell that to the board, and the board will listen because it's a directive, it's something that they may be fined, and the fines now are 10 million. It's important enough sum to get your voice heard. Anyway, thank you so much. And now we go, Jonathan, for the Q&A. I think we have 10 minutes for Q&A, so we have some time.
Okay, great. And thank you for that excellent presentation. Also in the question section, some people were like, oh, great presentation. So good job, and thank you to the people who complimented us. I see here in the question, there was a few things that a few people asked basically the same question. So I want to get to those first because that shows it's a little bit of a prevalence. There was a few questions regarding this, and I'll try to combine them into one. This is regarding the United Kingdom. First of all, they were asking the UK, the thing you mentioned with 17 million versus the EU, it was like a few thousand. Was that on the OT side, or was that spread to everything? And then the second question, and a few people have asked this, is does the NIS2 apply to the United Kingdom, to the UK?
NIS2 does not apply to the UK. Now, the UK, because of the amounts of fines that they impose for NIS-D, and it was the biggest complaint when I went to the UK. People were complaining about the fact that it was so disproportionate, the fines that you have for non-compliance from NIS-D to other countries. To that regard, when NIS-D was created in 2016, most of the thought was about losing of data. So the fines that have been imposed in the UK as part of NIS-D has been usually as part of attacks and as part of losing data. So as far as I know, there has been not fines imposed for like losing of getting down in an operational system. But as we have seen, this has changed. There is consequences now. We have seen in Poland the trains stopped. So we have seen a lot of, and we have reported that in our report, a lot of manufacturing companies, including pharmaceuticals, having downtime of 3-4 days. Now, where there will be fines if you're pharmaceutical system goes down for 4 days and there is a lack of this pharmaceutical or there's a problem, I think so. So I mean, while in the UK may not have these fines for that, I think going forward we maybe see fines that are not only based off losing data or losing privacy for your customers, but also for losing operations.
Okay. Excellent. There was also a few other questions people had just regarding the technical aspects, like, for example, the size cut, 10 million of revenue, 49 employees, 43 million euro balance. Do they have to have all three of those, or just one of those triggers the requirement?
The three of those.
They have to have all three.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Excellent. And then there was a few questions regarding 62443. And I'll just, some of them are asking, is that good enough or this? But one person asked a question that was specific. Let me see if I can find it right here.
But again, before we go to that, understand that this SCAP rule is something that you are not going to use. It's your government is going to use that to determine if you are falling into NIS2. There is like a misconception. It's like, oh, I decide if I am an important or essential entity, and that is not true. The government of each country is going to make a list, and that list is going to be appearing in 2025, as I put in my thing. And this list will tell you, they will tell you, you are an essential entity, you're an important entity. So your government is the one deciding this. But you can predict if you're going to fall into that by looking at the thing. But you can ask your government, hey.
And if someone knows if they assume or if they think that they are an important or critical entity, will the security level of IEC 62443 help them comply, or they have to wait, or what do you recommend in that case?
Again, what I would suggest is that, yes, the standard 62443 is the standard of we have today in the EU for OT, and I think is decent. I think that standards such as the one that will come out of TS 50701 are better because they are more focused on the vertical and understand the idiosyncrasies of each vertical. For example, it's very clear when we talk about rail that IEC 62443 is insufficient because there is no discrimination of a segment because of safety. In rail, we have segments which are signaling systems, which if this fails or is hacked, people or trains may crash. 62443 was created for manufacturing. It was not created for energy. It was not created for rail. It was not understanding that there were segments that are safety critical. If I don't want to go into like a rabbit hole, there's a Purdue model that they use recurrently, and the Purdue model may not be sufficient to understand a rail system or a segment of. That said, 62443 is a good start. But I think one of the better starts is to say, what of my segments are safety critical? Which of my segments are operationally critical? Which segments are IT critical? At the end, you're going to convert with 62443. But you have to understand also the state of the art. 62443 is old. We're now revising 3-2 in the committee, but it will take a year until 3-2 is revised. And I believe that things that unidirectional systems or unidirectional technologies 5 years ago were not as used. And now, if you don't know what a unidirectional gateway is or unidirectional technologies are, you are really missing, in particular if you're in rail, because it says in the standard that you need to use segmentation using an unidirectional system for when appropriate, again, but you need to be comfortable with that. And 62443 doesn't bring that up. So state of the art is the key word in here. 62443 is not a state of the art. 62443 is old, and it needs to be revised. So 62443 is enough. It's a good start. But I will say that if you know that this system is a safety system that cannot be, you need to look at it in a little bit of a more critical way.
Okay. And one person wrote here, is there a sort of self-assessment available to identify if my company does fall under NIS2 or will fall under NIS2?
Well, the self-assessment is what I discussed. It's, do I follow the size cap rule? Yes or no? Then maybe I could do a little diagram of like, then am I part of any of these things? Then yes or no. Now, I had a question from a good friend, and I have some calls before this asking that question, and like I make robots, and the question is, well, as far as I can see, no, but if you make robots for, let's say, a hospital, and these are critical for patients, you may fall into NIS2 because you are providing a critical infrastructure for a critical segment. So you maybe look at essential in the eyes of the company. But again, that may be a reporting between companies, not to the government. The government is going to be the least, but maybe your company will say, well, I think you are also, if you are hacked, then I will be paying the fine. So you need to do the same thing as I'm doing about reporting and everything.
Okay, going to that supply chain concept. Okay, I see here a few questions. I'm going to combine them because I believe the answer will probably answer all of them. One person wrote, how should non-EU countries relate to and comply to NIS2? Another one wrote, what about EEC countries like Norway and Switzerland? Does NIS2 apply for them? And then a third person asked, what if your company, it's an American company, but you have offices in Europe and operations in Europe in a place that does apply? How do these countries apply to
Wow, and you called me with the Norway and Switzerland. I think that's above and beyond what I can do as I can. What you can do is go to the EU, Europa.eu, and check if Norway and Switzerland have transposed NIS-D. I mean that. However, if you have a lot of collaboration with, I suppose, because of they are tied into the energy system sometimes, so the neighboring country, I suppose it applies to them, but that's a very question that I cannot say like right off the bat. And the other question was,
they were just asking if if they're a company in the United States and they have offices in the EU, how does that apply, or is that
Yeah, that's another thing that I think that is actually, yes, there's an article there where it's Article 4, where it says where your company is located and if the NIS2 directive apply to you. So there is an actual article there, which I think is Article 4, Article 5, where it says it tackles exactly that question, which is if you're incorporated in the EU or something like that. So there is actually wording for that. So there is an answer in the directive, but right now I cannot.
Depends how their company is set up, but it's basically set up for those companies as well, assuming they actually.
I think there is like a cap rule too. It's like it depends on how many people you serve, and I don't know. It's a little bit more.
And I'm guessing like a few years down the road, someone will be like, "Well, we're incorporated in America. We don't need to secure this. It's not going to fly in Europe." So I'm sure.
But there is there is wording. I read again. I read the directive. I read it, and I remember the Article 4 or 5. There was a wording on when the company is incorporated, if they applies to them. So there is wording on that in directive.
Okay. And we're almost out of time, but I have this one other question here that someone asked, a very specific question. In relation to the food industry, as an example, will the biggest food packaging providers be included under NIS2, or Absolutely, is it just production and distribution, or it's everything?
I think yes. But again, depends on your country. That is the fine line that every country will say, is that critical for my country,
okay, so some countries might say food, whatever production is not, or, and then maybe
if you continue, okay, food production is part of NIS2. So if you go to the CESCAP rule and you are an important, not an essential, but an important entity. Now, is food packaging part of the food manufacturing? That I believe it's like all these fine lines, are something that every country will decide. If that company fails, will that jeopardize the supply chain of food in my country? And if that's the case, then you will fall under NIS2. So my answer to this is the packaging you believe that is important is important for your country, then you will fall. It's very clear that food manufacturing, so creating food, it is now under the CESCAP rule. If you are more than 50 employees, 10 million, blah, 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 and you are a food company, then you are an important entity for your country, and your country will put you in the list.
Okay. Okay, and we're just about out of time. I want to thank everyone. We have about 50 questions. I just see one person here answered regarding the earlier question on self-assessment. He says various countries have published self-assessment tools, such as Netherlands and Belgium. So if anyone wants to Google that and chase that down. So that's there's a lot of questions here. We obviously don't have time to get to all of them. Thank you to everyone that's joined us. A copy recording of this webinar will be available on our website, and we'll probably also send you an email with a link to the recording in case anybody wants to review, in case they missed anything. So yeah,
just a final note. As there is many questions, and what the important thing here is to help each other. I will create a LinkedIn group or some sort of forum where I will put information on how this is transposed, so we can ask questions and answer with each other. I think I'm going to do this as a LinkedIn group for NIS2 for OT professionals, maybe as a forum in some other place. Once we send you the link with the webinar, or search me in the LinkedIn and we can be in contact. But the purpose of this is to help each other to find solutions and to really, help each other as OT professionals, how we can make this directive and law helpful for us to improve the cybersecurity of our infrastructure. So I hope to create that forum so we can start tracking and looking and helping each other.
Great. So Dr. Jesus Molina, thank you very much for the excellent presentation and answering everyone's question. Thank you to all the attendees who joined us, and everyone enjoy the rest of your week and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you so much, everybody that attended, and have a great week.
Great. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.